So the Navy in Hearts of Iron 4 is seemingly complicated. It's not actually as complex as the game makes it out to be. But we're going to go through, learn all the buttons, show you all the basics, and hopefully it'll make a lot more sense. First, we hit F2 to bring up our Navy menu. This is where we're going to control all of our Navy stuff. You can see this theater box on the right over here shows all of our fleets, all of our ships, and then down here at the bottom, this is where we can assign all of our admirals. These all correspond one-to-one, so if you can see I click on this admiral, it clicks right here. If I click here, it's selected right there. They're the same thing. You do sometimes want to control things from this theater over here instead of these admiral pictures down at the bottom, and the reason for that is it can just be a lot faster. So let's say I want to take this pack of 6 submarines here and I want to move it into this blue group. If I were to do that from the bottom, you have to like click on this guy to even see what's here, then click this, then right click over here, and then it moves it over. It's a little clunky, it's a little hard to see what's going on. But if you control it from this pane, you can simply click on these subs here, right click, and it just moves over. You can move them around super fast, super easy, very convenient. The other thing you can do is if you hold shift, you can select multiple. So I'm holding down shift, I can select, 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 put them all right here. It'll ask if I want to disband fleets because we've selected every task force under this admiral. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. You can see now that portrait disappears. Typically, what I always do at the start of the game, you want to get your navy in order. The default setup for every country is typically very bad. You just kind of have random smatterings of random ships all over the place. So it's best just to get them all under one single admiral, and then you can divvy them up however is appropriate. So at the start of the game, we'll hit F2, we hold down shift, and we just click, 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 click. Just click on every single one of these boys, and then put them all under one admiral. Now that they're all under the same guy, what we can do is we can make them move to a base. If you hold down control and then you right click on any naval base, you can see all of our ships are going to move here. What holding down right click or holding down control and right clicking does is it sets this as their main base of operations. So whatever you tell them to do, they'll always come back here as their central point, essentially, their home base. We're gonna up the game speed here. After you have all of your ships moved into this point, we're going to, again, just click on this admiral to make sure everything is selected. You can hit G to merge them all up. You can see the button right here. You can click this as well. It says shortcut G. There we go. And now we will have just one giant fleet of a whole bunch of ships. So we should go through and learn what all of these buttons do. Some of them are more useful than others, but it's good to know just what all of them do. Starting on the right, this thing here sets the engagement rule for your vessels. The way the Navy works, it's a lot more hands-off than you might think. Essentially, you're going to set orders for your admiral by clicking these buttons down here, and then your ships are just going to kind of do them. There's not a whole lot of manual control you have to do with ships, unlike with infantry. You know, if you're clicking your infantry to move them around, all that sort of thing. You can do that with ships, but typically everything you're going to do with ships is going to be automated. So what this does is it sets the level of aggression you want your ships to have. If we go to engage at low risk, they're only going to engage in naval battles they think they're going to absolutely dominate. If you have medium risk, they'll engage on roughly even terms. If it's at high risk, they'll take fights that they probably won't win. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend using that one a whole lot. And then there's always engage, where they will take every single fight possible. And then we have this last one, do not engage. This stops them from ever getting into a fight. Ships can still find them and shoot at them, but they will never go out of their way to attack any other ships. Reasons you might want to use this are if you're doing mine laying, for example. You don't want your mine laying ships to get involved in any skirmishes. You just want them to sail around and lay mines, so you would put that on for your mine laying ships. Something to note, if you have your fleets set to do not engage, they do not provide you with any naval supremacy. If you've ever tried to mess around with naval invasions or doing a D-Day or something like that, you know that you need greater than 50% naval supremacy in all of the tiles from where you're trying to launch your naval invasion to where it ends up being. But if you have do not engage set, then you won't be projecting any naval power into the tiles that you have selected. So something to keep in mind. For a beginner, I would recommend just leave this at medium risk. Don't even mess with it. You don't really need to use it. It's more of an advanced fiddly micro thing. Next, we have repair priority. This is very self-explanatory. It determines when your ships are going to try to automatically repair. So if you have it at high, if they take even a little bit of damage, they're going to try to sail back to a port and get repaired. If you have it at medium, they'll wait until they're a little bit more hurt, and then they'll go. If you have it at low, they'll pretty much never go until they're very disabled. Something to keep in mind, the game treats screens and capitals differently. As an example of what those are, a screen is something like a destroyer or a light cruiser. Capitals are the bigger, beefier ships, so like your aircraft carriers, your battleships, your armored cruisers, things like that. And the repair priority, let's say you have repair priority on medium, you might have a bunch of destroyers that are very low on health, and they still won't go to repair when it's on medium prio. This repair priority, it more affects the capital ships. Now, that said, if you have it on high, your destroyers are still going to get repaired. They're just not viewed as important as your capitals are, and so the game won't make them automatically repair as much. All right, so then we have this automatic split off button. Now, what this will do, if it is enabled, is whenever your ships are out doing their thing, they get into a fight, they take damage. Whichever ships are damaged, if this is turned on, they will automatically break off from your fleet. They will sail back on their own to a port somewhere and begin repairing. And then once they're fully repaired, they'll leave the port, merge back up with your fleet, and then everything will carry on as normal. This allows it so that your fleets can continue to do whatever operation they were doing without having to cease everything to go repair. The downside is your ships are incredibly vulnerable when doing this. This is why it's generally recommended you leave this off for your main fleets at the very least, because you don't want a handful of your battleships that got hurt sailing off trying to go repair, and then they get intercepted by the enemy fleet, and then they get sunk, and then your fleet's not there to protect them. So typically for your big main fleets, you just want them all to repair together as a group to keep them safe. But sometimes automatic split off can be very useful. For example, when you are training your ships, when you're exercising them, they will take damage through the process of getting trained. And if you don't have this turned on, then the entire fleet will have to head back and repair, and you're not getting the training value for those other ships. So there are cases where you want this enabled. Submarines, I know some people like to have it turned on for their submarines so that, you know, you're at 15 subs, 3 of them get injured, those 3 run back, and then you have 12 subs that are still out there hunting down enemy convoys. But yeah, I would just generally recommend leave it off for your main fleet. You can turn it on for smaller fleets if you want to. So you'll see when you turn this button on, you will have a numerator and a denominator. And what this will do is any ships that are in your reserves, that's this reserve fleet thing right here, any new ships that you build automatically just go into reserves, and they're basically just in storage waiting to be used. When you have this automatic reinforcement button turned on, any ships in your storage, in your reserves, that match what your fleet is looking for will automatically move to reinforce. So you can see here we're at 54 out of 71 submarines. Let's say I'm producing submarines. Those new submarines go into the reserve. If I have this button on, they'll continue to filter from the reserve into this fleet until this submarine pack is at 71 out of 71. We'll get into more about how to mess with this and what you want to do to set up your fleets to automatically create themselves. But that'll be for later. Here we have the Repair Now button. This, if you click it, whatever admiral you have selected, whatever fleet you have selected, they'll just immediately head home and begin to repair. This button is typically used for your main fleets. So again, because your main fleet's far more important and has far more responsibilities, and you don't want it to be fragmented into smaller, easily killable sections, what most people will do, they'll have repair priority turned off to never repair, and then they have the repair now button ready to use. After the fleet gets into a fight, if you have a bunch of capitals that are low on health, they're getting very damaged, you'll get a little pop-up up here that says capital fleets low on strength or something like that. Once you see that, you can find your fleet, click the repair now. They'll all go to repair as a group, and that way they're not prey for more cohesive enemy fleets. Next, we have the refit ships button. We don't have any designs we can refit right now, but you can see once you've selected a ship, you select this refit thing. You can essentially make modifications to your ships. This tends to be very expensive, and it tends to be not worth it. There are a few exceptions that I'll get into very quickly. The exceptions are radar is very good and very cheap to refit, and sonar can also be cheap to refit. Next, you have your refit ships button. We'll get into more on when and why and where you want to refit ships in the future. Just know for now, this basically just allows you to upgrade your ships to newer versions. Now we have this distribute selected ships into balanced task forces button. Well, that's a mouthful. Basically what this does is the game will automatically take whatever fleet you have, and it'll split it up into several smaller fleets. The hotkey for this, it doesn't say it on there, but D is essentially the same thing. D will split your selected fleet in half. You can hit G to merge them back up. You can see that's the next button here. I always prefer to use G instead of clicking on these things. It's just way faster. But let's say you got your main fleet here, and you know what? I actually want a fleet over here on this side of the US to defend the Pacific, and I want a fleet over here to defend the Atlantic. Well, you click your fleet, you hit D, boom, it's split in half, two equally divvied up forces, and then there you go. You can click one of them, control right-click somewhere over here in San Francisco. It'll rebase. And then you have your other main fleet. We're going to leave it here in Norfolk, and it's just going to stay there, do its thing. We can right-click to... assign some tiles. Sorry, you have to actually be selecting your admiral in order to assign sea tiles. Otherwise, you'll be trying to, like, tell your ships to move somewhere directly. So... click on the admiral, assign some sea tiles here, assign some over here, and then strike force. There you go. Now you have two fleets guarding both of your coasts. So that's why you would want to split your fleets up like that. Next button you have here is you can, whatever task force you have selected will be moved into the reserve fleets. So if we click this, we click that, boom, it moves into reserves. This button, I never click it. It's way easier just to control using the theaters here, or even using your admirals down at the bottom. So you see this is in the reserve. Well, we can click it, right-click. Now it's under the admiral. If we right-click the reserve, now it's back under reserve. I don't know why they have this button here. It's very useless. You can do it with whatever fleet you want. Super easy. Okay. Next, we can have the current selection of ships. So we're selecting this fleet of 32. We hit S is the hotkey. Boom. Now, half of these ships are selected and half are not. If you want to create a new task force with half of the ships, you can hit this create a new task force button. There you go. So you can split things up that way. Similar to how it works for controlling your infantry divisions as well. If you hit S multiple times, it'll just keep cutting whatever you have selected in half. Right. So if I have these 16 selected, we can hit S to select half of them. We can hit S again. Now we're selecting a fourth of them. Hit S again, we're selecting an eighth, and so on until you're only selecting one thing. Next, we have split selected task force in half. Shortcut for this one is D. This I tend to use a lot more than having the current selection of ships, just because you can very quickly and easily create multiple task forces. So let's say this 16, we want 8 ships, boom, there we go. 8 ships here, we want 4 ships, D, boom, there we go. 4, 2, you get the idea. And as you saw before, you have this little plus button, create a new task force. So if you select this, you say, oh, I want the New Mexico, the Tennessee, I want the Badger and Coal, and then new task force, boom. Now, here it is. We have those 4 ships. if you want to get very specific ships into or out of a task force. And then you have this delete task force button. Something to note, if you're familiar with air, this works different. When you delete an air wing, typically what happens, you get the manpower back and the ships will, or the planes will go into your reserves, and then you can just redeploy them somewhere else. This is not true with ships. If you want your ships to go into reserve, then you put them under this reserve fleet thing. You click, right click, now they're in reserve, right? If you hit this delete task force button for Navy, what it does is it destroys your ships. You get the manpower back, but it permanently destroys the ships. And ships are very expensive, so typically you just never, ever, ever destroy ships. I can count on one hand the number of times I've ever actually used this feature. So that's all the buttons there. Next we have our task force missions down here. This is really the bread and butter of how you control your Navy. So we have our Admiral here. Make sure he's selected. This is how you can assign and remove sea zones. So to do that, you can, with the Admiral selected, right-click to assign a sea zone. You can assign multiple, like that. If you want to remove a sea zone quickly, you can hold down Shift and right-click again, and it removes it. So, what these buttons will do is it will order your ships to perform whatever the activity is within the sea zones you have set. So, first one here we have is naval exercises. This one you don't even need to assign a sea zone to. You just hit the button and they'll perform their exercises wherever is most prudent. And this is actually super, super important for the Navy. What this does is it burns through your fuel at an astronomical rate. So be careful about that. If you know you're going to need a bunch of fuel for a war coming up, probably should stop training. But what this does is it gives you an absurd amount of naval experience, which is very important for Navy because you want to get through your doctrine tree, and you also have the research mechanic of being able to speed up some of your researches. Like you can see here for firefighting drills, you can cut the time down from 200 days to 60 days by spending 50 naval experience. You typically want to do this. It is a huge, huge, huge saving on your research. There are a lot of naval texts you got to get through. You want to use your naval XP to get through them as quickly as possible. And the way you primarily get naval experience is from training your Navy. So this button, very important. Something you can do, this is also true for air and land. If you hold Shift and you click this, this will cause your ships to train up until they become regulars, and then they will stop training. So if you just want to get rid of all of the, beginner malices and debuffs to your ships, you can do that. They'll train up to the point where they're combat ready, and then they'll stop training. But typically, because you want that naval experience at the start of the game especially, I'll just have all of my ships training. And you also want to remember, turn on automatic split off so that your ships don't just sink themselves in the middle of the water. This will make it so once a ship, it's training, it gets damaged, oh no, training accident, it'll break off, go back to your ports, fix itself, and then come back and rejoin and continue training. Make sure you have that on when you're training. Make sure you turn this off for your main fleet when you're actually at war. Next we have Patrol. What this does is it orders your task forces to basically just sail around and look for stuff. And again, we can assign multiple regions here. And so now all of these fleets, they're going to sail out into these 3 sea zones, and then they're just going to keep sailing around looking for enemy ships. If they think it's a good fight, depending on what your engagement rules are here, they will engage the enemy, and you'll have a little naval battle. Patrol, you typically want to use for things like destroyers, light cruisers, all of those smaller screening vessels. This is what you use to hunt down enemy submarines, to look for enemy fleets, and we'll get into more later on exactly why you want to do that. But something to bear in mind, your main fleet, all of these big aircraft carriers, battleships, all those sort of things, they burn through fuel at a ridiculous rate, which is pretty historically accurate. What you want to do is don't have them patrol. Okay, what you want them to do is use this button here, Strike Force. What Strike Force does is it tells your fleet assigned to this order, sit in base, don't do anything. Just sit and stand at alert. And then, what you can do is we'll create a new admiral here. You can have like a little destroyer group under a different admiral. You can have them also assigned to these sea zones, and you can put them on patrol. So what will happen is these guys will sail out here and patrol these waters, and when they encounter some big enemy fleet, they're going to radio back and go, oh, hey, we found this giant enemy fleet. You should go fight them. And then your fleet that's set to strike force, then it'll go, aha, enemy fleet detected. They'll leave port, sail out, engage in combat, win or lose, and then they'll sail back to port and continue to not do anything. This saves a ton on fuel, and it's generally the way you want to control your main fleet. Once you have this set up, like I said before, it's very automated. So we have these sea zones set to patrol. We actually need a few more. Typically, you want at least one task force per sea zone. We have 4 sea zones here, so let's get a few more task forces over here. There we go. This one's a little under strength. That's fine. You can see this number here, this 1 of 7. There are 7 task forces assigned to patrol the area. I'm not sure why it says so. Oh, because these 3 are also on. You can have mixed orders under one single admiral. I find it tends to just be annoying. It's a lot simpler to have like all of your patrol guys under one admiral and then your main navy under a different admiral. It's just a lot cleaner, and you typically want it that way for the purpose of stats. As you can see, you have all these different stats that your admirals can have, and the ones that you want for your main navy are probably not the same ones you want for your smaller destroyers. For example, on your destroyers, you might want like destroyer leader, hunter killer, these sorts of things. On your main fleet, you probably want something more like air controller, Ironside, big gun expert, all that good stuff. Next mission you have is convoy raiding. This typically is what you're going to be doing with your submarines. You can also do it with things like destroyers and light cruisers. This orders your ships to sail around in whatever sea zones you have selected, and they will try to hunt down and destroy enemy convoys. Pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Again, make sure you're not doing this with your main fleet. You're just going to burn up a ton of fuel. Just have them on strike force. Next order we have is convoy escort. This is kind of the reverse of convoy raiding. What this will do is everyone assigned to this order in the sea zones you've specified are going to attempt to sail with your convoys. This is very, very useful for defending them against enemy submarines, because the destroyers are just going to stay on your convoys at all times. The subs show up, try to destroy the convoys, the destroyers scare off or kill the submarines, and then you don't lose your shipping. Typically, you just want a bunch of destroyers, maybe light cruisers, assigned to convoy escort. It also builds up efficiency over time. So if you are losing convoys to submarines and you get a bunch of destroyers and you put them on convoy escort, and then you're still losing convoys to submarines, don't panic. It's just because your destroyers haven't gotten their efficiency built up yet. Once they're very efficient, then they'll pretty much be able to escort every single convoy that goes out. But also, you need enough destroyers, so make sure you have enough ships assigned to that order for it to be effective. Then you have mine laying, which you need mine laying rails to be able to do. You'll just sail around, dump mines in the water. What this does is it gives you a bonus to your naval supremacy. It slows enemy fleets in the area, and there's a chance the enemy fleets could hit the mines and you'll get damage and maybe sink some ships. Honestly, if you want, you can completely ignore mining forever. It's not a necessary part of the game, but it can be very effective and it can be very annoying. So that's up to you. Next, you have mine sweeping, which is the opposite. If you have mine sweeping gear on your ships, you can designate a sea zone and your ships will go through and clear out enemy mines. I don't think I have ever done a mine sweeping mission in a normal single player game. It really doesn't happen. The enemy AI really doesn't use mines, so you pretty much just don't have to worry about it. This is really only if you're doing multiplayer and your multiplayer game hasn't banned using mines. A lot of them ban it just because it's very obnoxious. Then finally we have naval invasion support. What this does is your ships will be on standby until you have a naval invasion order for your normal land divisions here. And once they start to do, like, let's say you are trying to invade Havana from Miami or something like that, your Marines in Miami will start setting sail. If you have naval invasion support on, your fleet will sail out to join them, and it'll protect them against enemy submarines and enemy fleets. It'll escort them to the naval landing zone. And then when your units are in combat, your main fleet will actually provide a shore bombardment bonus, which is very strong and very good for helping you take these tricky to capture ports. It gives a huge debuff to the enemy combatants in the fight. It's very, very good if you're trying to naval invade. You probably want some kind of naval invasion support going on. Something also to keep in mind, though, very expensive on fuel. It'll burn through your fuel if you just leave this order on all the time. So if you're doing a naval invasion, for the duration of the naval invasion, swap to this support button, and then once it ends, swap back to Strike Force. It's typically what I do. Final buttons, we have Hold, which very similar to your land-based forces. It just tells everybody to stop whatever they're doing. And then last one, you have Remove Region, which this is how you do it using buttons. You can remove these sea zones, but I find it much easier just to, you click your admiral, right-click to make the sea zone, shift right-click to remove the sea zone. I find that way easier. A little trick that is helpful, though, let's say, the game's been going on late, you got like all kinds of sea zones all over the place that are marked and you're doing crazy stuff everywhere and you can't remember it all and you don't have the time to like go through and clean all of it up. What you can do is you got your admiral selected, just right click on this trash can and then say, yes, I want to remove all regions. Boom. Now they're all gone. Cleans it all up for you. Very handy. And you can see we still have these regions here for our green admiral. You want to do the same thing with him. Click the green admiral, right click, remove all regions, boom. Now we have no sea zones assigned anywhere. Very handy. So in addition to those buttons, there are a few more control things you can do. If you select a fleet and you just right click, you can make it move around manually. This typically you won't use, but sometimes, let's say you as a human, spot the enemy fleet somewhere, or let's say your subs are getting raided or something like that, and basically you just want to override everything and you want to tell your fleet, get into that battle. What you would do is you select your fleet and just right-click on the tile the battle is taking place in, and then your fleet will sail over there and it will attempt to find them and engage in the battle. Now, you could get unlucky, bad spotting rolls or whatever, your fleet just can't find them, and your fleet just sits here and it seems like nothing happens, and then the battle ends and you're sad. That's just how it goes. It's kind of a luck thing. It can be affected by things like radar, spotting values, all of that sort of thing. But yeah, hopefully your fleet will find the battle, and then it'll engage with the enemy, and you'll be able to manually reinforce that way. Alright, last few things to know about your basic controls. If you hold control and left click on a port, you can designate it to not allow repairs. Why would you want to do this? Well, let's say you are way over here in the Pacific somewhere, and you're looking at Midway. It's a level 1 port. It's not very good at repairing. It'll take your ships forever to repair if they just sit there and repair. Or maybe it's in an enemy air zone, and they have a whole bunch of naval bombers that just keep harassing over and over. You can turn that off, and then your ships won't try to go here to repair anymore. So when you hit the repair button, or when they automatically repair, they'll go somewhere else, like, say, Honolulu, with a nice level 10 port to get them repaired up faster. Last basic thing, we have, when you click on a sea tile, we have these access levels here. What these do is you can restrict your naval travel through certain regions. This is mostly used for convoys, although it does apply to your fleets as well. So if you put avoid, what will happen is your fleets and your convoys will do their best to not go into this sea zone, but if it's the only way through, they will go through it. So for example, if we put both of these to avoid, and your ships really need to get into the Gulf of Mexico here, because the only way in there is through these zones, they'll still go through the zone. But if they don't have to go through there, then they won't. And then you also have blocked. So if you assign these regions as blocked, they just won't go through there no matter what. Even if you tell them, hey, go do a mission in the Gulf of Mexico, they won't do it because these sea tiles are blocked. Something that can happen when you are doing naval invasion orders is you might forget, oh, I have one of these sea zones blocked, and my naval invasion order goes through that sea zone, and then you just can't figure out why is my naval invasion not going. Well, make sure you check your sea zone access level. I have had this happen to me before. It's very annoying, and it's very tricky to troubleshoot. So that's something to look for if your naval invasions are not going off. That's all for the basic controls. There's still a lot more to the Navy, but we will deal with all of that in other episodes.